Hey there! Thanks for joining me today as I talk about fine motor skills. Those are the small muscles that children use in everyday tasks such as dressing themselves, brushing their teeth, washing their hands. These small motor skills are also very important as children go to school and they learn to draw and write and cut. And many teachers have noticed a decline in these small motor skills because children are spending way too much time in front of a screen. Tapping and swiping just doesn't activate the brain and use the small muscles like some of the other activities such as playing with blocks and Play-Doh and stringing and some of the other things that they will be expected to do at school. So another good thing about using these small motor skills and doing cutting activities is it encourages bilateral coordination. That is doing one thing with one hand and doing something else with another hand. And that takes a lot of practice for young children. It may be simple for you, but cutting for a young child is a very complex task. So I know you want your children ready for school. You've got the school supplies and the backpack. It's also important to give them some experiences with these things at home so they'll feel competent and capable when they start school. Now, first of all, I want to talk about some little tips for getting them ready to cut. And you're going to notice everything I do today is simple and easy and inexpensive. And a lot of things I'm going to be doing are with recycled materials. One thing I would suggest that you do is get a little tub and a pair of safety scissors. And that's your child's cutting tub. When you give it to them, act like it's a gift and you're giving them a present. Another thing, when you start cutting with your children, you have to tell them the rules. You only cut things that are in the cutting tub. No hair, no clothes, no things like that. When you start demonstrating some of these things, it's important for you to engage with your child. Model, model, model. Children learn more from modeling than anything that we might tell them. So demonstrate how to use these materials, show them what to do, and then give them the opportunity to work on their own. It's important to vary the materials in the cutting tub. If it's just plain paper all the time, they'll get bored with that. But if you can add coupons that they can cut out, and you can add wrapping paper and maybe old greeting cards, different things like that to vary the stimulus and keep them involved. Now, some little tips for when you begin to cut with the children. You have to tell them the thumb goes on top, and you could put a sticker on the thumb or just draw a little face with a marker that I did. So thumbs are always on top. And when you get the safety scissors, if you tie a little piece of ribbon or put a little piece of tape in the hole where the thumb goes, that will help them know which hole that it goes in. And then you might need to practice just making snips. Open and close the scissors just like a little alligator taking bites. When children use tongs in the kitchen and tweezers, that's another way to practice this open and close skill. And you talk about there's a cutting hand and there is a helping hand. The helping hand holds the paper, the cutting hand does the work. And before children can cut, they need to tear. And so, you know, just like a child has to crawl before they walk, they need to cut before you start, they need to tear before you start doing some cutting activities with them. Start off with thin paper like tissue paper and demonstrate how to tear the tissue paper. And you can even use the little pieces that you tear to make a collage, or if you have an empty plastic bottle, they can take the little pieces and put them in the plastic bottle. I always like to recycle things that the children do into art projects and other things, so it shows them that's important. You can give them old napkins to tear up. After they get really good at tearing the thin pieces of paper, you can give them paper plates or maybe greeting cards or things that are a little bit thicker to tear. Yeah. Now, I also want to talk about cutting. Like I said, when you begin to cut, thumbs on top, take small bites, hold the other paper in your other hand, And it will be easier when children begin to cut if you give them some stiffer paper. It's easier, and smaller pieces are easier to cut than big pieces. So things like index cards work very well when children begin to cut. And just snips. First they're just gonna make little snips, just like little fringe in the paper. Another thing that you can do is give them strips of paper. And if you give them strips of paper like this, they can make little snips and just cut right through it. And there again, you could use these things for making a collage. One thing that they love to snip, and I even like to do this, is straws. Straws are easy to hold, and when you snip the straws, it makes a really cool sound. And they go all over. Isn't that fun? And then you can play a pickup game and pick the different things up. So just little snips to begin with. And then after they're pretty good at the little snips, you can draw some lines on paper, and they can cut along the lines. And this works really well with construction paper because it's a little bit firmer to hold than just copy paper. A lot of people like to use grocery bags because they're nice and thick too, and easy for the children to hold, and you can use those and practice making strips. Now, after you just let them freely cut some strips, you can make a little game by drawing dots on the paper, and they have to follow the dots and connect the dots. And then you could even make a little pathway for them to cut through and have a little sticker or something at the end, and they have to cut in between the lines. So it takes a lot of cutting in straight lines to get to the point where you're ready to do some curves. Now, when you start doing the curves, you can give them some shapes that they can cut out on the curve. Another good thing to do is to give them a stencil to trace around, and so like cups and plates and toys and puzzle pieces, let them put them down, trace around it with a pencil, and then they can cut it out. So you get like several skills going with something like that, and they can begin to cut out shapes. After they get really good at cutting out shapes, then you can start giving them some magazines and some catalogs and let them cut out some simple shapes. Many times when children begin to cut pictures out, this is what you'll say, that they'll do a few cut snips and then they get bored with it, or they get frustrated and they tear. That's very common. Just expect that to happen. I also have some Play-Doh in here. This is another way to build up those cutting skills, because if you roll the Play-Doh into snakes and then you can cut little snips, it's easier to practice cutting with Play-Doh than it is the paper, because it's a little bit thicker and easier to manipulate the scissors through it. Junk mail is great to give to the kids to cut. They're just, cutting strips or cutting it open and see what's inside and then cutting it. If you have, old paper plates, and food boxes are great to cut because it's nice and heavy and really requires those fingers to work a little bit. So, save your food boxes and let the children cut those out too. So, one other thing I wanted to mention, many times when children begin to cut, they hold the scissors to hold the paper and they kind of flap their arms and fly around. We want them to keep their elbows down by their sides. That way they'll have more control with the scissors and the paper. And a fun thing to do is to wad up 2 sheets of paper and put a sheet of paper under each arm and see if they can keep the paper under their arms as they cut, and that's quite a challenge. So all of these things really make children think. They make their brains work. They're fun for you to do. They're easy, they're inexpensive. And then when your child does go to school, they're going to feel a lot lot more confident and capable when the teacher hands them a pair of scissors. And you have to remember with all these things, it's the process, not the product. It's just, that they're attempting to do it, they're trying to do it. It's all good. Doesn't matter what it looks like. As long as they're engaged and they're trying, it's all good. So thank you for joining me, and cut it out and have a good time snipping with your child.